being recorded. All right, I can see our participants loading in. Welcome everyone. So excited to see you at the first Arch and Hook webinar of the year. Thrilled to have all of you join you today. Please accept our apologies for the delay. You know, the technical issues with with Zoom and calling just never end, no matter how long, how much time passes. So please accept our apologies and thank you for sticking with us and joining us today nonetheless. This will definitely be a very interesting conversation. I'm surrounded by incredible experts in the field of fashion and sustainability. So I promise you it will be a great conversation with a lot of interesting insights. My name is Neda. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Arch and Hook, and I'm very excited to moderate this conversation today on the topic of sustainable materials and the impact of sustainable materials within fashion retail. And as I mentioned, I'm very honored to be surrounded by incredible experts and thought leaders in the field within fashion retail. Yeah, I think it will be a great evening. Thank you for joining us from all around the world. And please, we want to encourage you to ask questions and share comments. Please ask your questions in the Q&A button within the Zoom environment, and I will definitely address them. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion, so please feel free to ship them when they come to you, and I'll address them in the end with our lovely speakers. So without further ado, I'd love to give the floor to our speakers for a short introduction, so that we can kick off. Patsy, maybe you can start.
Hi everyone, my pleasure to be here. I'm an academic at Manchester Fashion Institute at Manchester Metropolitan University, and my expertise is around corporate social responsibility in fashion supply chains and also connecting that with fashion marketing and consumer behaviour.
Perfect, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you. Cyndi, would you introduce yourself?
Sure thing, and it's a delight to be here today. Thanks so much for the invitation. And good to see everyone somewhere out there in Zoom world. My name's Cyndi Rhoades, and I'm the founder of Worn Again Technologies. We have been in development of a molecular recycling technology for textiles, so we can take in pure polyester and polycotton blends, going into a process that can separate, decontaminate, and extract both polyester and cellulose from textiles to go back into the supply chain as new. We are currently in our scaling phase of developments. We're pre-commercial, but we have an ambition to get to 40 plants by 2040 with the aim of replacing the use of virgin resources.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you and welcome. And Shailja, last but by no means least.
Hi, and yeah, thank you so much for the invitation as well. I'm Shailja Dubé, and I lead the Institute of Positive Fashion program at the British Fashion Council. And the IPF, as we know it, is the BFC's commitment to guide UK fashion's climate agenda. So that's really our main focus. We launched it in 2020, set up across 3 pillars: environment, people, community, and craftsmanship. And since then, we've been quite focused on how to contribute to pushing forward the action of a sustainable circular fashion economy in the UK, with our aim to embed a circular fashion ecosystem in the UK by 2030. Ambitious, but by no means something that we can't do with everybody on this call, and indeed everybody listening as well. So we're doing so through our flagship project, which I'll speak about a little bit later on, called the Circular Fashion Ecosystem Project.
Sounds great, thank you. Lovely to have you all, and excited to talk about materials. So maybe Cyndi, we can start with you. You have incredible years of experience around the area of textiles and in plastics in the context of textile. Could you tell us a little bit more about, you know, where is the industry in reality today? We know that a lot of focus has been placed on, removing this virgin nature and single-use nature of plastics in textiles. But what is the real status of the situation today?
That's a very big question and complex, but I'll give it a go here. So I think the best way to look at it as, if we start with the scale of the problem around production and around waste, most people will be familiar with the figures of about 57 million tons of polyester being produced every year. 32 million of that is going into our apparel. That's a lot of polyester. The demand for polyester, even though we've got all these conversations going on about needing to reduce consumption, is still set to increase dramatically over the next decade. Some people say 34% increase, others say 63%. What we do know is that the chances are it's going to go up. Then on this flip side of production, we have the extraordinary volumes of textiles going to either landfill or incineration. And facts and stats around that tend to vary as well, but around 80 to 85% of all textiles end up in landfill. It may get recycled to start with, but eventually, well, almost all of it ends up in landfill after downcycling. So that's the doom and gloom. Where are we at today? Well, in terms of recycling, we know that circularity will play a huge role in the solution. However, we are a far cry from where we need to be. When we look at polyester, the recycled polyester that's being used is only around 14% recycled, and it's primarily from bottles. We know that the competition over bottles as feedstock is going to get worse, especially after the EU announcement of the EU textile strategy a couple of weeks ago. Extended producer responsibility is going to become a big thing. And ultimately, all of this is leading to the fact that we need to move to textile recycling. The challenge here is that less than 1% is being turned, of textiles today are being turned back into new textiles. Lots of reasons behind this, but ultimately the technologies aren't yet scaled that's going to be able to deal with this. So if we want to move from 1% textile to 100%, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of investment, and a lot of coordination. So I'll finish on this last point to give you an example here. Even when we've got 10 plants up and running, 20 plants, 40 plants, and some of the other innovators that are also in development, if we want to reach 32 million tons of that polyester made for apparel, we're going to start with plants operating around 50,000 tons capacity. So getting from that to 32 million tons is really, really a massive jump. So, ultimately we have to get focused on that end goal where we're collecting all the polyester, we're restoring it, we're recirculating it, but we're at about 4 minutes on the clock face of circularity. So a long way to go.
Okay, so what would be a realistic time frame very quickly in your mind, just off the top of your head? What do you think the reality of the change would be?
Very clearly, there's a lot of targets looking at 2030, but my view is that it's going to take a good couple of decades. And I'm involved in a project called World Circular Textiles Day, and we put forward the idea that it's going to take until 2050 to get to full circularity. Obviously, if we can get there any quicker, great, but there's so much that needs to be done. And there's a lot of short-term wins, and I think we're going to talk about those as well today.
A very quick welcome to Cris joining us today, our GM Furniture and Fixtures from Arch and Hook. And I'll come to you, Cris, quickly for an introduction in a few minutes. But I think this maybe gives us a good segue to Shailja and the Circular Fashion Ecosystem Project. So as a practical application of one of the biggest markets in the world of how to take actionable steps in the challenge, for example, that Cyndi illustrated. Could you tell us a little bit about the emphasis on materials within this program, especially plastics, and how can this be applied at scale, and essentially how is this program tackling the problem that Cyndi illustrated and the general addiction to plastics?
Yeah, well, that's again you're not asking any small questions there. At all, but they're hugely important ones. So from the Circular Fashion Ecosystem Research Phase 1, so it's a multi-year endeavor, just which I think is probably very, very important just to clarify. So we completed Phase 1 research last year. We had a wonderful advisory board, of which Cyndi was a member of, so huge thanks on behalf of the BFC for that as well. We were able to arrive at, I think what was clear and unambiguous when the messaging is businesses need to transform. The whole value chain radically needs to transform and move to sustainable and responsible practices, given we're in a resource-constrained world. And just to pick up on some of the negative points that Cyndi, you mentioned as well, globally consumption is set to rise around 63% over the next 10 years. So we have a fundamental problem that we need to address. And through the CFE report, what we hope to demonstrate is this is not a unique problem that we have to approach or need to approach in silos. This is a collaboration and a collective effort. And what we did is we arrived at some 3 target outcomes, 10 priority action areas, and 30 recommendations outlining 13 different stakeholder groups, what they need to do. Those 3 target outcomes were to reduce the volume of new physical clothing that we're producing, how we can maximize utilization through product circularity. That was number 2. And our third one is around optimizing those sorting methodologies and materials recovery. So really focusing on that post-use ecosystem. And in fact, of the 10 priority action areas, the post-use ecosystem yielded the most recommendations. It has the most amount of actions needed, really focusing on so much of what Cyndi just mentioned as well. But when it comes to the materials piece, one of the key action areas is to increase the demand for recycled, regenerative, renewable fibers. And that's a real key thing that we arrived at through our process. There is a need to drive improvements in this area, specifically getting brands, retailers, and that consumer appetite for these materials in play. Why? Because it's really critical to drive investment and to drive in technological improvements that's going to be needed to meet the design demands of the future and enable scale as well for a growing population. So those are some of the key things that we arrived at. But I guess the importance of it all is to understand that sustainable fibers can compete with virgin fibers when it comes to choice, when it comes to speed, and crucially on price as well, because we want to outline that this is also a discussion about accessibility as well when it comes to price point. That's hugely, hugely important, especially when we think about the volume players out there and the fact that the major transformation really lies with them. And there is something about making sure we can reach all parts of society with different socioeconomic backgrounds through circular and sustainable fashion. And to answer your second point around the global scale, that's where we think that the CFE project is really quite unique, because we have outlined how to really arrive at a way that all stakeholders can work together. Some play a leading role, some playing an enabling role in moving us forward to a circular fashion economy. but governments definitely play a key role, as well as brands and retailers. And some of the key things that we are having a lot of discussions about is, first and foremost, we need regulation, we need incentives, tax breaks as well, carbon tax, anything really that's there to drive the right kind of business behaviors that's needed. With EPR coming in, again, as Cyndi mentioned, these are all the right conditions for our economy to flourish. So how can we scale existing solutions, get an investment in innovation as well, and good green climate finance are some of the key levers that can be pulled, not just in the UK, but globally. And this will have a direct impact on businesses.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, I think a lot of important aspects jump from what you were just sharing. I think maybe something that could link us forward is the expectation of increased consumption versus the need of decreased consumption. So maybe Patsy, we can talk a little bit about the consumer. So what are trends and expectations, and in your area of research, what are you seeing? Is there a change in the consumer? Are there initiatives that are very effectively changing the mindset of the consumer when it comes to sustainability and demand? I think maybe it's a triad between the private sector, the public sector, and the consumer, of course.
Yeah, I think there's much more appetite now and much greater awareness and interest in sustainable fashion, and really understanding where things come from and how things are made. But equally, there's also that perception that sustainable fashion is more expensive, is not as accessible for all people. And I think there's a lack of understanding of all the different forms of being sustainable in fashion, such as, rentals, sharing, swapping, pre-loved, resale, and all of that. It's not necessarily always about buying into an expensive, sustainable, in italics, fashion brand. It's also about what we do with the clothing, how we purchase it, how we use it, and how we responsibly dispose of it. And I think there is definitely something around a consumer piece to kind of really increase awareness of the whole spectrum of sustainable fashion. But certainly with our students, there is a huge appetite for this. Manchester Fashion Institute is one of the biggest fashion schools in the UK, and we cover fashion business, fashion design, fashion communications. And I'd say year on year, we see the students are much more interested in this area, and they want to focus on this, that they want to sort of change things, reimagine fast fashion, for example, look at new ways of producing and designing materials, and really kind of, yes, there is still interest in working for those fast fashion brands. As you probably know, Manchester is the UK capital for online fast fashion now, but students want to go into those brands and really change them and for the better. And they're quite critical of, initiatives that are happening on the high street and the mass market, and really it's not enough. So they recognise that we see these kind of capsule sustainable collections, or sort of campaigns, initiatives using activists or whatever, but it's only a very small proportion of the entire range, and they recognise that more needs to be done, and it needs to be offered across the whole product range, not just a certain capsule collection. So I think things are moving in the right direction, but certainly there's a lot that still needs to be done.
No, absolutely. But positive to hear that the next generation is for sure on the right track, and both from a designer perspective, but also from a consumer perspective. So only hope forward, I suppose. And a warm welcome, Cris. Thank you for joining us to the webinar. Would love to hear from you as well on the perspective of the plastic addiction of fashion, but beyond the product as well. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about you and kind of what your thoughts are around kind of where the issues that global brands are facing around materials in the retail context as well.
100%. Thank you all, and humble and honored to be part of this great panel here. I'm Cris. I am the global general manager for at Arch & Hook, focus on fixtures and furniture. The term goods not for resale, to me, they mean something different. I think as customers, they walk into a store environment, everything is for sale. it's the brand concept, it's the brand message in regards to sustainability and circularity. So it goes beyond the garment, right? It goes on the hanger, which is, as at Arch and Hook we say, it's the brand's handshake. But it goes also on where the customer sits to try on a pair of shoes. It goes in the fitting room. You know, it's the message towards circularity and sustainability. It must be beyond the garments. Customers, they do pay attention to it. They are asking the right questions. They are curious and they demand information. They have the right to know where post-industrial waste is going. Is it going into landfill? Is it, or is there already an initiative to utilize this post-industrial waste into something else? And this is really my focus. And as a company, we drive innovation and change by asking these questions and giving ideas and alternatives to the usage of post-industrial and post-consumer waste for that matter. So really looking into the whole chain from industrial initiatives to different usages, but inside the retail environment. What's the good of a fully recycled polyester if it's in an environment that it's utilizing materials that are non-FSC certified, that you have wall panels that are going to end up in the landfill, or even, you know, worst, going into the ocean. So it has to be a message as a whole, right? So this is really what makes me happy and excited every day to talk to people and really drive change in as a whole within brands and retails.
Super, thank you. I mean, we have a very diverse audience here of professionals primarily working within fashion retail. So perhaps it could be very applicable to talk about things that any person within a fashion retail company can take on in their day-by-day job or impact within a brand or within a company. Maybe we can divert the conversation a little bit around the practical applications, or how can professionals within fashion retail companies or the companies themselves drive this, you know, sustainable change, because as we've heard so far, it's a big jump and it's a complex journey forward. And one of the things that's come through both also from Patsy's story from the consumer side, but also from the actual business side is the price of sustainability. So the economics of the economics of sustainability essentially. So what is in reality the price of sustainability, and how can brands and companies approach this from a budgeting perspective? And from kind of a, you know, strategy projection forward. Shailja, would you kick that one off?
Thank you. I think fundamentally it resides in the operations, and every business unit, basically, in a business, in a brand, and a retailer has a role to play when it comes to trying to embed this across the system. So it's fundamentally, from a business perspective, I would say it is about risk profiling to future-proof your business. If you think about the fragility of our supply chains, that really came to light through COVID in the last 2 years, through Brexit as well in the UK. But it's really being played out in climate change, and that's where we're going to see a lot more issues from a business continuity perspective. So cotton crops, for example, subject to prolonged repeated failure in coming years, constantly sourcing virgin materials. I guess we just need to find alternatives to business as usual. And the potential for that case is very clear, given all the instability we're seeing when it comes to the climate and further globalization as well, just being at risk. There was a recent report by the EMF Foundation as well on the business model that made a note that I think there's a $700 billion US economic opportunity at play when it comes to embracing circularity. So when you think about how that can play out with circular and sharing business models, that's a real kind of benefit, financial, economic benefit, but really embedding that within a business across the whole lifespan of your products, and not, again, as mentioned, not just in one collection, but across all of your product ranges, can yield better economic benefits as well as future-proofing your business, and ultimately, I think, deepening your connection with your customer base as well. If you can develop some systems that enable resale, rental, how you can maintain that relationship for beyond point of sale, really. But it also is, when mentioned about the future-proofing your business, the extended producer responsibility tax coming in. This is going to have some implications for your business as well. So how can you anticipate that in the right way? It's all part of the same discussion when one is considering the P&L of a business.
Fantastic. Cyndi, is there anything from your perspective, maybe from the actual textile material engineering side in this scale, and how could you relate that issue with, for example, purchasing departments?
Well, I think looking at it through the lens of materials is a really, really good one, because materials is responsible, or raw material production is responsible for 23% of impacts during the whole life cycle in terms of environmental impact. So it's a really important one. Regarding the price of sustainability, if you're looking at it from a molecular recycling perspective, or where we're looking at recapturing raw materials, replacing them with virgin and getting them into supply chains, it's over here. And I think a lot of people are trying to understand, how do we get there? What are the stepping stones? And the first thing I would say on that is go to Shailja's report that talks about the circular fashion ecosystem, because it shows the absolute complexity of what needs to happen. There is no simple answer, and it also depends where you sit on the stakeholder supply chain. Now, from our perspective, what do we want? We want to see brands that have the open access to their customers. We want them talking about circularity. We want them setting up collection programs, either in store or working with a partner. It could be a charity or a private collector. However they do it, it's getting that message across that collecting textiles, getting them back into the system, is absolutely essential for circularity. It's not the only thing. And when I talk about circularity, I'm specifically talking about the material side rather than product circularity, because there's all sorts of definitions for that around reuse and rental. So that's an important one. I think another key step that we'd like to see in terms of how the brands are engaging is get in the queue for circular outputs from textile to textile recycling processes in the form, very specifically, of offtake agreements. And the reason this is important is because the demand for outputs from processes like ours and other recycling innovators, the demand is going to outstrip supply for the foreseeable future, for a really, really long time. And so the sooner the brands get connected and aligned with some of the innovators, they're going to be protecting their supply, which is super key. The other point on that is that the quicker technologies like this scale and replicate, the quicker the economics are going to get to scale, bringing the price down for everyone. I mean, we as a Target have a goal to enable our future plant operators to produce very high volumes of polyester and cellulose made from textiles that could compete on price with virgin materials. However, market dynamics will be at play. There's going to be a huge demand. So it may be there's a premium for these in the foreseeable future. And so there's all sorts of things coming into play here. But ultimately, if the goal is to replace virgin materials, we have to put a value on that. The market will drive the transition, but if the industry wants it sooner, it really needs to be part of accelerating those step changes and getting involved in the innovations, getting involved in the working groups, anywhere that because there's a lot of this we know, and we'll probably mention it a couple times today. None of this can happen in isolation, and no one brand can do it alone. So, the value of the industry working groups, the initiatives, the pilots are so key in moving this all forward.
Super. Patsy, anything in your experience, perhaps from an academic or research perspective, from a young designer perspective, from a consumer in terms of pricing and the impact of pricing procurement for materials of any kind?
I think there's also a paradox between the marketing messages that we see from brands and often some of their sustainability initiatives. So a lot of the marketing is really still about encouraging consumers to buy more stuff, to impulse purchase, because that's how revenue happens. And we haven't really seen much innovation around business models to rethink how we can make profitable revenue streams that are not associated with just selling more stuff. And obviously, as brands internationalize, they sell to more markets. We see now production and consumption happening in the global south as well as the global north. But I think it would be a very brave brand that really thought about, slowing down. But essentially, that's what we need to do. We need to make better use of things that are existing rather than just, buying more stuff. But I can't quite see how that's going to happen without some, legislation, carbon tax or something. I mean, there's lots of interest in, tiny businesses. There's a few organisations in Manchester, for example, that are kind of working in this space and, kind of doing well-being styling services. So helping consumers making more out of their existing wardrobe. But it tends to be kind of small businesses, and we don't really see it at scale. And we still have the huge volume brands and retailers on the marketplace that, but up to a third of all clothing that is ever produced never gets sold. So it is incredibly wasteful, and we need to kind of rethink and be more effective with what we're producing and making sure that we can sell everything rather than, having this huge amount of waste. At the moment, there is no extended producer responsibility in the UK, but that may change.
And for sure, as mentioned earlier, I suppose unified across the industry as a whole. It can be done in silos, and I think that's a pretty important aspect in this issue. And Cris, from the perspective again of the entire retail environment, what are concrete steps that companies or sustainability managers, procurement managers can actually take for this holistic impact that you talk when they select materials, when they find partners, or just in the strive to not use plastics?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the price of sustainability, right? How can we put a price tag on planet Earth, right? That's really what it is, right? For the future generations to come, is there a price tag on the planet? So this is a big question. But when it comes to reusing materials that are already in our environment, like for instance, I'm going to go back to post-industrial waste. We recently used 75 to an execution of a chair that we are rotomolding. We are using 75% of the mass that goes into that chair from a post-industrial waste of textile, combined with only 25% of recycled polyethylene powder. So we're already starting 75% of the whole mass of a chair from something that was existing. So at the end, it does become more affordable to make that chair because we're only utilizing 25% of recycled polyethylene. So the price of sustainability, it really goes around creativity and the usage or the incentive to use a material that is already in our environment. And I heard that already from all of us here, that it really is a collective thought process and a much larger discussion. But it does start with the thought process and the design aspect of embedding post-industrial and post-consumer waste into the new products that are going to come. Another example, I think Cyndi, you posted something on LinkedIn of a video that to me was absolutely shocking. Per second, over approximately 20,000 bottles, from water bottles to laundry detergent bottles, are made globally. I was shocked. So again, education, information drives knowledge and drives consumer appetite to ask for change. But again, another example, if we're looking into a simple tabletop that goes into a retail space, a 4 foot by 4 foot or 1.2 meters by 1.2 meters, 20 millimeters thick, 3/4 inch thick. We're talking approximately 300 laundry detergent bottles that are grinded and made into a tabletop, one single tabletop. Picture any retailer out there, 100 tables a store times 100 stores, or even a big box, 1,000 stores out there. That's how we drive change, right? And that means also economics and efficiencies in terms of the price of sustainability.
Amazing. And maybe opening to all of our lovely speakers today, in terms of, there are a lot of positive initiatives that are happening, and a lot of fashion brands and retailers are taking very positive steps. What are some concrete actions or successful case studies that you have come across, in terms of, maybe it's not a specific brand and their campaign, but positive things that you're seeing getting us closer to the goals that we discussed earlier? Perhaps as an inspiration to our listeners today.
I may jump in as just some general trends picking up on the innovation side of the industry, which is hugely important when it comes to solutions for the future. We're seeing so many more startups, white label companies really looking at different ways of manufacturing, on-demand manufacturing, on-demand models, to help brands and retailers move away from holding stock, overproduction, waste, these use of AI, machine learning as a way to really shift the way we make products. That to me is hugely exciting. And if we can have a look at some of these innovations and success stories that are happening, maybe we don't need to approach our business models with a make then sell mentality, but actually sell it first, make it afterwards, and really just use what we need to, because fundamentally we need to make less stuff. We need to use products and move products in fundamentally different ways. So I think innovation is hugely inspiring. So I would definitely, I don't know, everybody who's listening today, do a search online of some innovations in fashion production and sustainable production methods, and seek some inspiration about how you can infuse that thinking into your working life.
Anyone else?
I'm happy to jump in there. I think Shailja's got a great point about innovation and the merging of new innovations with commercial reality, and seeing what happens in some of these situations. I mean, it rather than, I guess, looking at individual brands, I think where I see a lot of excitement happening. Well, it's exciting for me, maybe others find it not so much so, but you know, looking at the energy in some of the industry working groups that are out there, that are bringing the brands together around a problem or a solution. You know, I was looking earlier at the microfiber consortium's website, and there was a case study about Fjällräven and being able to test a new fleece through their standardized industry approach with the microfiber consortium. And the fact that there was something standardized that they could take this material to and test it, and they passed it and they made a product from it. And it's just simple things like that that I think, you know, help move everyone forward, getting involved in that, as well as, you know, groups like Textile Exchange, you know, bringing the industry around really big commitments to move to rPET, recycled PET. Okay, today it's made out of bottles, but there's an absolute understanding now that bottles are going to stay in the bottling industry, and the textile industry needs to sort out its own mess. So that renewed focus on being able to turn textiles back into new textiles. Accelerating circularity, another really important industry group for us, particularly because they're focused on that post-consumer, post-industrial textile supply chain. So helping to prepare the collection and the sorting supply chains to be able to supply very high volume, efficient specifications of feedstock, which is what we're going to require in the future. Others like Reverse Resources, Global Fashion Agenda, British Fashion Institute, you know, with the circular fashion ecosystem. I mean, sorry, British Fashion Council. You know, there's so many, and RAP in the UK. There's so many you can't even remember them all. But while I think there's this sense of industry working group fatigue, I don't think we should underestimate the value of what it brings, because again, it's nothing that one brand can do on its own. So I get very excited by all the innovation that's being brought to industry through these groups. Fashion for Good, another one. There was another innovation I came across quite recently. I don't know if you've heard of Oxwash, based in the UK, on-demand laundry service for both wet and dry cleaning, which has totally revolutionized how clothes can be cleaned. And they're dealing with a microfiber issue, which, you know, is huge. And it's, again, it's one component that brought in and amplified could really help solve some big industry problems. Because, you know, when we talk about polyester specifically, in many circles, it's got a very negative connotation because it's a plastic. Plastics are bad. Well, actually, plastic is the ultimate circular material because you can build it back up, you can repair it, you can keep it going back into new products, so long as you keep it out of the rivers, the oceans, and the air. And I think, you know, some of those challenges, if we can look to overcome them and ramp those up, then we can start moving forward on our circular ambitions.
Perfect. To Patsy and Cris, any final perhaps positive case studies or practical advice to our listeners, also from an internal stakeholder perspective? How can they make a difference in their day by day?
I'm quite interested in normalizing secondhand, because, you know, in the future we will need to reuse things a lot more than we do now. And I really liked in the UK Selfridges luxury department store collaboration with Oxfam charity, where they were like rethinking the way that we shop, and they presented an edited selection and worked with a celebrity stylist of secondhand clothes from the charity within the luxury department store environment, to show, you know, a different type of consumer who perhaps wouldn't go rummaging around in a charity shop, to see that, you know, this is viable. So I think that's a really interesting area, and brands are now also offering secondhand authenticated alongside new product on their website. And also I was in France last week, and I thought the secondhand scene in the town where I was staying was excellent. And it's really about kind of merchandising those stores, presenting an edited selection. And in fact, it was so good that some of the stores I went into, I didn't even realize it was secondhand until I started looking at the actual products, because it was such a beautiful shopping environment, and it was a world away from grubbing around in a charity shop jumble sale. You know, that's not for everyone, is it? So we need to offer, you know, different types of secondhand resale experiences that kind of, you know, cross the whole different market levels of fashion, from your sort of kilo sale to your vintage emporium to your sort of high-end consignment and beautiful boutique environments as well. But it's about sort of merchandising it and styling it in an appealing way for people.
Yeah, specifically, I love the fact that we're thinking not the plastic problem, is the plastic solution, like Cyndi said, right? We have to be part of the solution, no longer part of the problem. And here specifically in the US, even though I collaborate with brands and our, you know, many customers in a global scale, I think what's more exciting to me is that more and more brands and retailers are coming up front and asking the question, how can I make a change? How can I drive? I don't want to be part of the problem anymore. I want to be part of the solution, right? So specifically here in the US, you know, we've seen some very interesting programs with Nike, for instance, where there's such a huge push for sustainability, not only within the apparel, but all the way through the store environment, and not only in the materials that are chosen, but in the design phase of a fixture or a product. You know, how can we easily not mix materials? Therefore, we're looking into how it's going to be recycled at its end cycle, right? It's like a pair of jeans. If you have the more rivets and zippers and added on mixed materials, the harder is going to be to recycle at end of its cycle. Therefore, in the physical aspect, products that are less mixed materials, already thinking through the second, third, and fourth lives. So yeah, this is really exciting. And Cyndi, I do get excited as well about talking those things. So you're not alone.
Perhaps a good moment to have a look at our audience. There's a couple of questions that have come in. I just want to say hi to Ihuoma from Nigeria. And we have a question from Andrea from Colombia. She's telling us that in Colombia, the fashion industry is very focused on lingerie, swimsuits, and activewear. And many brands are using PET recycled textiles, but as we all know, they're petroleum-based and not really circular. Are there any case studies or examples about what they can do to textile recycling with those fabrics, and what could be a solution for this textile waste at the moment? So perhaps for you, Cyndi.
Yes, this is the big question, the million-dollar question that everyone would like an answer for today. I think when it comes to PET, the reality is we're still in the phase of bottles to textiles, because those are the scaled up technologies and processes that exist. We need to have a bit more patience for when molecular recycling is going to be scaled for textile to textile. But equally, yes, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's an education piece that we need people to understand that it's coming, and to not lose patience. And in the meantime, we can find other solutions for end-of-use textiles, for post-consumer. It may be downcycling, you know, that's better than going to landfill or incineration. But textile to textile is very, very limited today. So the advice there is just make sure that the textiles get back into the system, that they're collected by, whether it's a charity, a textile bank, a private collector, get those textiles, keep them in circulation, and as the industry evolves to be able to deal and advance the technologies, then we will be able to get that circular textile on a much bigger scale.
Thank you. And there's a question from Sylvia, I believe for you, Cyndi, and perhaps for Shailja. She's asking if you could just rename the report that you mentioned earlier, and the case study or project of washing clothes. If you can just mention it again.
Yes. There was two things I mentioned. One was the report that the British Fashion Council did, Circular Fashion Ecosystem. Maybe Shailja could put up a link for that. And then the other company I mentioned was called Oxwash, which you can just Google and see what they're up to. I'll mention it there if you can see.
Perfect, thank you. And Shailja, perhaps we can share with our listeners the latest report after the webinar, maybe in a link, if some of our listeners are interested in.
Absolutely, I'll share two links, one for the full report and one that's a dedicated link for an interactive diagram, which I hope will be helpful. You can see which stakeholder group you feel you belong to, and it will give some recommendations and action areas. So hopefully very direct and concrete in terms of next steps, or at the very least some inspiration for thinking in a new way.
Perfect, thank you, that will be great. And there's a question from Megan that has just come through. If it's a very specific question for brands, if anybody has had a look at Victoria's Secret's first ESG report, and if there's any thoughts on theirs and the CSR efforts by fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M. Perhaps it's very, very brand specific, this question. I don't know if there are any thoughts, perhaps in general in the lingerie or fast fashion as some of the most, most consumer driven and high volume sectors in general. Maybe not specific for these brands, but if there's any thoughts.
I've not read the Victoria's Secret report, but I'll have a look at that now that you mention it. But I think for me, and also what our students often recognise is that although these brands are big enough to kind of invest in innovative technologies and really support scaling of things, the big problem is their kind of growth trajectory and the volume of product which is being put out on the market, which doesn't seem to sit well with sustainability and this constant rate of change. So I think it's quite a mixed bag, really, isn't it, in terms of the investments and the efforts made in terms of implementing innovations, but at the same time, there's more and more product every year.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Perhaps I don't know if there are any final closing remarks from our speakers in terms of next steps or any key takeaways for our audience. In terms of materials and sustainability programs.
I'm happy to kick off on a final thought. I think one of the most important thing, if you have any level of influence at the company, is try to encourage making true cost accounting part of your annual reporting, so that the environmental impacts are considered in equal measure with real dollars and cents. I think changing perspectives around value and what we measure will be the quickest and most efficient way to getting all stakeholders and all shareholders aligned and working towards a time when profit becomes synonymous with positive impacts.
Fantastic, thank you.
I was asked the other day, because we see a lot of like, okay, in the next 20 years, 10 years, 50 years, but how about the next 5 years? And I said, well, I really wish the CEOs and would get their bonus linked to the actual changes they implemented in their companies. I wish Wall Street would have a way to value the companies and companies shared in terms of how much sustainability was brought to the table and how much good these companies made to the planet. So I know it's a little fantastic, but I really wish that it happens way sooner than later.
Yeah, I love that. And just to add to that as well, I think the movement of B Corps as well is another thing to look to, where exactly as Cyndi is saying, there's so much more when it comes to reporting the success of a business than the measure beyond financial, to look at societal, to look at your own employees as well, look within, and really understand that there are so many different ways of measuring what success looks like beyond this linear growth model that we have, obsessed with year-on-year growth and financial returns for stakeholders. There are other measures, and I think it's part of a global movement around looking at societal change as well as planetary health, and to feed that back into business is quite radical, but it's possible. So yeah, I'd encourage everybody here to look at things in a different way.
Any final remarks, Patsy, from you?
Yeah, my final point would be just to sort of rethink the growth trajectory and ensure that any marketing communications is aligned with sustainability plans. But I think it is problematic, isn't it? It's really difficult to get those different functions in a business working together, but there is opportunities for those to meet more closely going forwards.
Perfect. And I'm seeing there's a lot of there's still questions coming in, which is fantastic. It's so good to see that our audience was engaged, and it was fantastic conversations. Perhaps we can share them to our panelists, and they can send some answers through in our follow-up email. So stay tuned to your inbox. We'll send the links from the reports by the IPF and the BFC from Shailja, and perhaps we can address the remaining questions. For now, thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. I think an incredibly informational and interesting conversation today. Certainly, as we're seeing, not something to be tackled in 1 hour, and to be continued for sure. But thank you for the great insights and fantastic input. And thank you all for joining us today and being with us on this well, in the Netherlands evening. And until next time, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.